Hi, thanks for inviting me to come and talk to you today. My name's Andrew Fox. I'm the Group Head of Learning and Talent Development for HSBC. I'm here today to talk about diversity and inclusion, and it's a subject I feel passionately about, and so hopefully we can have some good and interesting dialogue around the topic which everyone seems to be talking about at the moment. I think the issue of creating a diverse and inclusive workforce has been something that has been discussed for some time. And increasingly, in fact, the dialogue is ratcheting up in this space. And I think one of the reasons is because we realize that there are compelling social and economic reasons for creating a transformed and diverse and inclusive workforce. But at the same time, we realize that the progress in this space has been dismally slow. In fact, if we track the performance of how workplaces are diversifying, particularly at senior levels, I think we would be intolerant of the level of progress in any other aspect of running a business. And so I think what's happening is businesses are increasingly realizing, on the one hand, it's important. On the other hand, we're really struggling to create a meaningful transformation program in organizations, as I said, particularly at senior levels. So I think sometimes in human resources, we focus on the philosophical or social reasons for transformation, and we may not engage our business leaders on the commercial side. And I'm going to focus on one aspect of the commercial side, although there are many. So, for example, spending patterns around disposable income in families has changed significantly over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, disposable income in families were controlled by the patriarchal model of the family, and so the male typically, and it's a generalization, particularly was true, so the disposable income was controlled by the male in the family. All the research we have says that that's been changing for the last 20 years, and in fact, other groups in society, particularly females, are now in control of more and more disposable income. So just there in and of itself, organizations need to understand the demographics of their customer base and the way disposable income spending decisions are shifting in society. But actually, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something which I think is much more compelling. I think research clearly shows that if an environment in the workplace, particularly at senior levels, is diverse and is inclusive in its approach, it's more effective in its decision-making. And I think that the last decade shows us the series of corporate scandals which have taken place, which have literally wiped off billions of dollars from balance sheets and P&L statements. And not all, of course, can be attributed to the fact that teams were not diverse and they were homogenous, and therefore you had groupthink and people were afraid to talk out and new ideas and challenge was not introduced into the team. But if you read some of the detailed reports based on the corporate scandals which have taken place, that dynamic, that groupthink, that homogeneous decision-making process, and that inability to speak out actually plays an important role in the genesis of many of these corporate scandals. And so for me, the real compelling reason for creating a diverse and inclusive senior leadership cadre in a business is to make sure that your decision-making processes are much more robust. And for me, that is the best thing an organization can do to both protect itself now and also ensure a sustainable business going forwards. So I think what we find is that research tells us that if leadership teams are not diverse, then certain processes take place when they make decisions, when they review their business, and when they make strategic decisions about how they go forwards. And I think that research will tell us very clearly that lack of diversity and lack of inclusivity in the decision-making process puts a business at real risk. It puts it at commercial risk, but it puts it at a whole series of other risks as well, including reputational risk. And I think we go back to the example where we look at all the corporate scandals. I think the most recent public one is Volkswagen, VW, with its emissions scandal. But if you go back to the genesis of that, what you'll find is you'll find a groupthink. You'll find a lack of challenge in the boardroom. Similarly, with regards to the BP scandal in the Gulf, where the oil spill created billions of dollars worth of damage and cost the firm billions of dollars. what you'll find is that people at lower levels in the organization were speaking out around concerns around safety and around standards. But as those pieces of information filtered up through the organization, they were cut out until the point at the top of house where they were no longer even being put on the table for discussion. So organizations have developed this method of filtering out bad news, of filtering out diverse opinions, of filtering out views that may be divergent from that of the leadership group. And where the leadership group is homogenous, then the ideas are going to be the same, and you have that groupthink process that's taking place. I think when you take a look at all of the research data, and some of the big consulting houses have done really well in taking a look at recent history and then projecting forwards to look at the pace of change that's likely to expect. I think Ernst & Young have published some good research in this space. I think before that, McKinsey's published some good research. And that research tells us the pace of change is very slow. And if we don't do something completely different, then our boardrooms and our senior leadership cadres are likely to remain unchanged for a considerable period of time. I know that many of these reports, when they talk about diversity, they talk about gender, and that is the easiest one to measure, and it's the one that's most visible, and it's the one where many organizations start. And whilst I think that's probably appropriate, we also need to realize that diversity spans many more dimensions other than just gender. Some of those research reports also clearly tell us that when you take a look at creating diversity in a team, that if you create diversity at the level of gender, other elements of diversity are much easier to follow. So for me, almost gender diversity is a Trojan horse for a much broader change program at the senior leadership level, which is why I think it's important and why all the research reports are really important in terms of the warning signs that they tell us. The thing I think that's really fascinating is that despite the dialogue, despite the focus on investment, progress has been so slow. And we would not tolerate that level of change in other aspects of our business. If you're in a business, for example, a retail business, and you want to launch a new product, or you want to open a new branch in a new market, you know exactly what to do. There's a laid out project plan. You create a value chain where you understand all the instances where you'll influence that process. You'll put measures in place, and you'll drive to achieve whatever your target was. As I said, the launch of a new product, or the opening of a new store. In financial services, it's the same. If you want to launch a new credit card in a new market, you know exactly what to do. You set out your targets. You create a process by which you will achieve those targets, and then you just diligently follow that process. You create a series of measures at every stage of that evolution, and you make sure you hit whatever target it was you set out to yourself. For some reason, we think that the issue of creating a diverse workforce is different. If our business leaders are really serious about creating a diverse workforce and one that's more inclusive, then they should use the same methodology they do to achieve everything else that's important to them in their business, to focus on this particular element. My view would be that that's not happening at the moment, and until it happens, the progress will continue to be paltry. So I think what HR can do to help the business transform is simply to hold up the mirror and help them understand that the diligence with which they tackle other important key business issues is the same methodology and diligence that they need to apply to the issue of creating a diverse and inclusive workforce. That includes targets, that includes measures, that includes holding people accountable.